What is syntax? It's a crazy word that basically means the rules for using a language. So any spoken language has syntax, and programming language has syntax as well. So if I were to bring up my console again, and we'll go down and take a look at some basic output commands that we've been using. So if I were to log something to the console, basic hello world, this works because it follows the rules of the JavaScript language. There are some really important ones to know right off the bat. First of all, JavaScript is case sensitive, which means if I were to type this with a capital letter, it's not going to work. And you see the error it gives me is that console is not defined. So it's never heard of this thing console with a capital C. Similarly, if we capitalize the log method, if that's capitalized, we get an error that it doesn't know what that method is either. The case you use matters. Now where it doesn't matter is when you are actually printing out output. So if I have the word I'm printing out in different cases, that doesn't matter. It's going to just print out exactly what I put in here because this isn't a command. This is the data that I'm using. So it's just going to go ahead and basically print that to the console exactly as I wrote it down in here. The same goes for methods like alert. You can see that I've got my dialog box up here. Works fine. But if I were to change the case at all, it's not going to work because it's never heard of this alert with a capital A. The second thing is that symbols like the parentheses, those rounded brackets, we call those parentheses, and the quotes and the semicolons, they're important to structuring a statement in JavaScript. Just like in a sentence in English, you need to use commas and periods and exclamation marks correctly. You have to do the same thing in a programming language. So if I were to write this same line and leave out just the parentheses, that doesn't work. If I were to leave out just the quotes, I'm going to get a different kind of an error. Now this error isn't technically a syntax error because hello could be defined. We could have made something called a variable called hello and given it a value. We'll talk about that a little later on. I can show you what I mean very briefly by creating a variable, calling it hello, and set it equal to, say, the number 67. Now if I try to alert hello, that has the value of 67, as you can see up here. So we'll get into variables a little bit later on in the course in more detail. But that's not so much a syntax error as it was just not defined at the time we tried to print it out. Any statement that you're going to write also has to end in a semicolon. Although JavaScript console is really, really forgiving, if I don't put a semicolon on the end of this line, it will still print out an alert. But in your program, you're going to have many lines of JavaScript, one after another. And if you don't have semicolons in the right places at the ends of your statements, you're going to run into problems. If you get a syntax error, it's telling you that it's just something about the way you structured this sentence of code, this statement of code, is incorrect. So going forward, you're going to hear me talk about syntax quite a lot as we introduce new concepts, and I'll explain what is the correct syntax to use for different concepts. Right now, we've really only dealt with the alert, the console.log method, and the document.write method. And since all of these are methods or functions, you have to remember after the name of the command you're going to run to have a pair of brackets with a semicolon after it, and the thing you want printed to be inside of those brackets. So similarly, I would get an error if I did something like this, where you can see if you look closely that I didn't close the quotes before I closed the bracket. So this bracket here on the left hand side, this open parentheses we call it, doesn't really have a matching closing parentheses, because as far as JavaScript is concerned, this parentheses is actually just part of some text that you want to print. So if I hit enter here, I am going to get a syntax error, and this one's pretty clear. It says it's missing a closing parentheses after the argument list, and the argument list is the stuff that goes inside the brackets that you want to print.